course. That means that they're kind of questioning the extent to which climate science is real. But they're also often critical of the skeptics. Anyway, they talk about the skeptics quite a lot, whereas the rest do not. Now, if you go through the names of the most well-known skeptics, you'll see that every once in a while another particular source pops up. That's clientscience.gov. Clientscience.gov seems to give quite a lot of credence to the skeptics, or at least the skeptics, if you wanted to say this formally, have quite a bit of impact on climatescience.gov, because we're not looking qualitatively whether they're positive or negative mentions. We just want to know whether they're mentioned. SourceWatch, this is why I mentioned previously that it's about also issue commitment. SourceWatch is a watchdog, yeah? So they're watching the skeptics. Yeah? So you have partisanship and or issue commitment is what this shows, per source, per issue. Some other ones. The spheres. Now, the idea of a sphere comes from the blogosphere. That's the most famous sphere, if you will. Also, researchers are increasingly talking about another one called the web sphere. Now, how is at least the blogosphere, how is that normally studied? It's oftentimes studied as a genre. Right? The blog software, interestingly enough, has incorporated any number of features that makes it into a genre. The one feature is reverse chronological order. When you see a blog, you know it's a blog. It's that fixed, if you will, in the software. The blogosphere is oftentimes also studied in terms of its relationship with news. In particular with this notion of mainstream news. The blogosphere is in some sense, or portions of it I should say, are quite obsessed with the mainstream news. The question is the extent to which they're parasitic on it. Also the blogosphere is oftentimes studied in terms of its authenticity, that it authenticates voices, that it's closer to the real, it's less mediated, etc. The Iraqi bloggers come to mind. I mentioned previously also the web sphere as this other idea, this other part of the web that's different from the blogosphere. That's oftentimes studied in sort of web archiving circles. They try to build web spheres, actually special collections of sites. If you go to archive.org, you'll see that there are about 4 or 5 special collections, 9/11 sites, U.S. election website special collections, and tsunami, etc. How else to study them? What we do is we do comparative or cross-spherical analysis, if you will. We look into whether or not the hierarchies of credibility, as in study search engines, the hierarchies of credibility are similar or different per sphere. So you can identify spheres according to the fact that each has its dominant device. For the web, it's Google. For the blogosphere, it's Technorati. For the news sphere, arguably it's Google News. For something that we call the tagosphere or the social bookmarking space, it's Delicious, etc. Yeah, and then we look at the results per sphere. So what if you're just in the blogosphere? Do you get different sources that are important there versus if you're in the web sphere? What sources are important there? Or the news? Yeah? So it's comparative new media analysis, if you will. And the results are kind of interesting. What you see before you, this is what we call the Issue Animals project. What we're interested in is which animals are most associated with climate change, which animals are most associated with climate change per sphere. So in the news, you see that the polar bear jumps out and the other animals are a little bit smaller. That is, the polar bear is the one that is most associated with climate change in the news. In the blogosphere, it's amplified. Yeah? So this sort of gives is some evidence of how parasitic the blogosphere is on the news and how it follows the news and amplifies it. The polar bear is much larger. The web, intriguingly enough, does not privilege one animal over the other. Now, this is interesting in the sense, and I was kind of surprised by these findings, but it's interesting in the sense of what one could call the quality of media. So whether or not particular media spaces rely on or need to create icons. So it appears that the news and the blogosphere, being an amplifying the news, they're quite icon friendly, if you will, whereas the web sphere doesn't necessarily think it's necessary or doesn't participate in the creation of the poster animal, if you will. The webs. How are they normally studied? Well, first of all, the web is normally studied in the singular. They're not studied in the plural. As I mentioned previously, oftentimes the web has been studied as a cyberspace. And in particular, this idea, a lot of the, let's call it ideology associated with cyberspace had to do with particular understandings of the infrastructure of the internet. You know, the end-to-end principle, the packet switching principle, the idea that on the internet no one knows that you're a dog, that the internet treats censorship as a malfunction and routes around it. These particular ideas had to do with understandings of the infrastructure. Well, we know that anonymity is very, very difficult to achieve online, number one, and number two, that there is lots and lots of internet censorship these days. Yeah? So that the infrastructure itself does not give rise necessarily to these new possibilities. Anyway, oftentimes it's studied in those terms. It's oftentimes studied also as this kind of separate space. Now, how else could it be studied? What is very important to know is that, at least this is the argument, but it also has some facts behind it. But what's important to know is that the web has been grounded kind of technically. You'll notice that when you type google.com into your browser here, you'll get redirected to google.fr. So that is because your IP address has a location to it, GeoIP. Now this particular feature was something that came out of an important lawsuit that was launched by two French non-governmental organizations in 2000 against Yahoo, because the French users could actually see the sort of Nazi, National Socialist paraphernalia pages on Yahoo. And the two NGOs sued Yahoo and said that it's illegal for French users to be surfing that kind of material. So what the engineers did is they looked into and tried to find a way where you could locate where the users are, and indeed you can, GeoIP. Yeah? So it grounds the web. Yeah? So your content is being, increasingly, I don't know, but for a portion of it, it's being served nationally, or according to your language. Yeah? And this fits with the needs of advertising, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. What I'd rather talk about are the research opportunities available when we think about that there is no longer a web, but that there are webs, and they have borders, national borders. So what we do is national web studies, if you will. And what we're looking to do, and this is a project that started out 2 years ago, when I was trying to think through how we could understand what's happening in Iraq. So we had the authentic Iraqi bloggers, we had news reports, we had military reports, and then we had the occasional sort of fact-finding, whether it was a US senator or someone else going to the ground, who would then sort of go, have a sort of tour of a market, and there would be a camera on them, and the market would be all cleared out of any undesirables, so it would look good. So we had sort of 4 accounts going of what's going on the ground. So what I was interested in is thinking through whether or not we could diagnose the condition of Iraq, of how Iraq is doing, by looking at the Iraqi web. Is it broken? Are the universities online, the hospitals? etc.